Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling something really critical, a kind of perfect storm brewing globally. We're looking at two massive problems colliding: biological invasions and, well, the vectors for some of the world's worst diseases. Specifically, we're diving into the unexpected and potentially quite dangerous links between invasive plants in water and mosquitoes. Our main source for this is a really insightful perspective article. It came out in Ecology Letters titled Double Trouble: Aquatic Invasive Plants Can Promote Mosquitoes. It's led by Chikodza and her colleagues, and honestly, it lays out a whole new way we might need to think about managing invasive species.
Absolutely. And our goal today really is to unpack what they've synthesized, what we know so far, but more importantly, explore this novel conceptual framework they're proposing. Because the urgency here is, well, it's significant. You've got these two crises sort of expanding together: biological invasions, plants, insects spreading everywhere, and disease-carrying mosquitoes also expanding their range. And both are being pushed along by the same things, human activities like globalization, climate change, pollution.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
Right. So you have these invasive plants wrecking ecosystems on one side, and on the other, mosquitoes posing these huge public health risks, disease, mortality. And this paper is suggesting, wait a minute, maybe these two threats are actually kind of working together, especially in water.
Precisely. We know individually that aquatic invasive plants, or AIPs, and mosquitoes are major threats. They contribute massively to global illness and death rates. That's not new. But it's the interaction between them that's often overlooked.
Right. And that's the gap, isn't it? The paper makes a strong point here. On land, in terrestrial systems, we know invasive plants help invasive insects. That's like established ecology. It's been studied quite a bit. But then you look at water, aquatic environments, and this specific link, AIPs boosting mosquitoes. It's just profoundly understudied. We've kept them in separate boxes.
Yeah, manage them separately. And what makes the potential connection really compelling is when you see certain key species expanding almost in parallel. Take Pistia stratiotes, that's water lettuce. It's a notorious aquatic invader spread across, 5 continents now. Its rapid spread looks remarkably similar to the invasion path of Aedes albopictus, the tiger mosquito, the one that carries dengue and Zika.
Okay, that parallel spread is striking. But you're saying it doesn't automatically mean one causes the other, right? So
Yeah.
what's the suggested link? Shared habitats.
It's a bit more than just geography. It's about shared environmental niches and critically shared human pathways that help them both spread. The authors are careful. They point out both species tolerate pollution really well, so they thrive in places humans have messed up. And their introduction routes often overlap. Think about the ornamental plant trade plants get shipped. Maybe mosquito eggs tag along. Or even the used tire trade. Bizarrely enough, it can move plant bits and mosquito eggs globally. It really shows how human activity can create this double trouble.
Double trouble, right. Okay, let's dig into how these plants actually change the water. The paper calls them ecosystem engineers. So they're not passive. They actively reshape the habitat. How did they do that structurally?
Well, the most obvious way is by forming these incredibly dense mats of vegetation. Imagine a thick floating carpet just covering the water surface, sometimes completely. And that structural change has immediate knock-on effects on the water's physics and chemistry.
And what are the changes that basically put out a welcome mat for mosquitoes?
Okay, first big one, water stagnation. Those dense mats stop water flow. Mosquitoes need still, stagnant water for their eggs and larvae, so that's huge. Second, the mats change the local conditions, the microclimate, right there at the water surface. Water temperature changes. Less light gets through. The water chemistry is altered. And then there's the food aspect. As bits of the plant die and decompose, that debris pumps nitrogen and phosphorus into the water. Those nutrients fuel blooms of microbes, bacteria, algae. And those microbes are the main food for mosquito larvae. The plant basically creates a stagnant, sheltered, all-you-can-eat buffet.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds like a perfect setup. Structure, shelter, food. Now, Chikodza and her colleagues looked at existing studies to see, is there solid proof of this link at the population level? They identified 5 ways these plants might influence mosquitoes, but the big takeaway seemed to be the evidence is kind of messy. Mixed, weak, sometimes contradictory. Why is that?
That mixed evidence is actually a really important finding itself. It tells us the relationship isn't simple. It's highly context-dependent. What that means is maybe a certain plant helps mosquitoes thrive in one place, say California. But in Florida, under different conditions, maybe it actually hinders them. We were looking for a universal rule, but nature served up complexity.
Okay, let's use an example. The first mechanism they looked at was structure providing substrate, basically places to lay eggs or rest. That should be good for mosquitoes, shouldn't it?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And there is strong evidence from that. AIPs offer sheltered spots for adult mosquitoes to rest, and more surfaces for egg laying, like the roots of water lettuce, Pistias trachiotes. They hang down in the water, all fine and dense. Perfect breeding sites for Mansonia mosquitoes, which lay their eggs right on those roots.
Well, there's a but. You mentioned a trade-off.
Exactly. The conflict comes when that mat gets too dense. Imagine a really thick, solid carpet of something like Salvinia reticulata, the water fern. If it completely covers the surface, female mosquitoes literally can't get to the water to lay their eggs. So the plant's structure can both help and hurt, depending on how thick it gets. Density matters.
Interesting. What about the chemical side? That seemed even more complicated in their analysis. Plants provide food, okay, but also chemical signals.
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating, kind of paradoxical. The paper highlights two potentially conflicting chemical roles. First, some plants, like water hyacinth, Eichhornia grassipes, release chemicals from their roots, exudates that actually attract certain mosquitoes, like Colex cuncifasciatus, telling them, hey, good place to lay eggs here.
Okay, so an attractant signal, but you said conflicting.
Right, because conversely, other chemicals, phytochemicals released by the very same plants, water lettuce and water hyacinth included, have been shown to potentially kill mosquito larvae. They can be toxic.
Wait, hold on. So in the same patch of water, the same plant might be sending out a come lay eggs here signal while also releasing something that could poison the babies.
That seems to be the paradox. Maybe the attractant works for the adult female at low concentrations, but the toxin affects the larva later, or at higher doses. It's incredibly complex to figure out, and it really shows why just looking at one plant and one mosquito species often gives these confusing, inconclusive results.
Which makes perfect sense then why the authors argue we need to zoom out. The population level studies are just too messy, too context specific. And that brings us to the really novel contribution of this paper, their conceptual framework, looking at community level effects and what they call ecological surprises.
Exactly. The complexity is the whole point. The big knowledge gap isn't just if a plant affects a mosquito, but how its presence ripples through the entire ecosystem. The final outcome seems to depend so much on the specific traits of the plant, the mosquito species involved, the local climate, the existing native community. All this complexity makes it highly likely we'll see ecological surprises, basically unexpected, large-scale changes that we didn't predict from just looking at pairs of species.
Right. So we're moving beyond plant A plus mosquito B and asking how plant A changes the whole neighborhood, the entire aquatic community. The authors propose three big hypotheses at this community scale, ideas that are largely untested. They actually mark the current evidence level as none. What are these big untested ideas?
Okay, the first one they call novelty. The idea here is that invasive plants that are really different, functionally different, from the native plants, well, they might support fewer native mosquitoes, but they might actually favor invasive mosquitoes or certain adapted natives. Why? Because native mosquitoes might be sort of naive to the chemical signals or the physical structure of this totally new thing in their environment. It's like a new architecture they don't know how to use properly yet.
Okay, that makes sense. And that connects to their second hypothesis, right? Enemy reduction. If the native mosquitoes are confused, what about the things that normally eat them? The predators.
That's the hypothesis, that these novel AIP structures might be bad news for the natural enemies, the fish, the dragonfly larvae, the beetles that usually keep mosquito populations in check. These predators might not have evolved the right hunting strategies or tolerances to deal with this dense, chemically different alien environment, so they can't effectively control mosquitoes hiding in the invasive weeds. The predators get lost, basically, while the mosquitoes find a safe haven.
A predator-free refuge. And the third hypothesis brings in the time factor. Adaptation.
Yes, and this is really important for thinking about long-term management. The idea is that mosquitoes might actually get better at using these invasive plants over time. The longer the invasion persists, the more time mosquitoes have to adapt their behavior, maybe even evolve, to exploit the resources and refuges the AIP provides. That initial novelty effect wears off, so the risk could actually increase the longer an invasion goes unmanaged.
So you've got this complex mosquito life cycle, part in water, part on land. You've got the AIPs drastically changing the microclimate and structure. It pretty much guarantees these interactions are going to be complex, context-dependent, and we should probably expect the unexpected, these ecological surprises.
That's the core message, I think. It shifts how we should think about it. It's
Yeah.
not just managing a known, predictable problem, it's preparing for potentially unpredictable, large-scale ecological shifts with public health consequences.
Okay, so let's talk about the bigger picture then. What does all this mean? If future research starts confirming these community-level links, and honestly, those parallel invasion patterns you mentioned are pretty suggestive. It feels like we need a major shift, a paradigm shift in how we handle this double trouble.
I think that's right. It really calls for much better integration, much more collaboration between invasion ecologists and medical entomologists. We can't have the ecologists over here worrying about biodiversity loss from the plant, and the public health folks over there worrying about mosquito-borne disease from the same patch of water, acting like they're separate issues.
Right. Suddenly, managing invasive water weeds isn't just about protecting native plants or fish anymore. It becomes a direct public health intervention, doesn't it?
No.
Especially in places already struggling with malaria, dengue, Zika, West Nile. So what does that integration look like on the ground? Shared funding, joint research teams?
It probably needs to mean all of the above. The authors specifically call for targeted experiments, both in the field, in situ, and in controlled lab settings, ex situ. We need experiments designed specifically to test these new community-level hypotheses, looking at things like climate interactions, the functional traits of the plants, and the mosquitoes. Only then can we develop management strategies that are truly adaptive and based on solid evidence for both ecological and health outcomes. Yeah, instead of just pulling weeds to help native plants, the reason might become we're pulling these weeds because they're potentially making people sick by boosting disease vectors. Understanding these downstream effects, these cascades, is just crucial for being proactive in a world facing so much human pressure and biological invasion.
It really drives home the interconnectedness. Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you, the listener, to really chew on. Given this double trouble dynamic, one invasion potentially fueling another, with these complex, unexpected outcomes, should we start thinking differently about policy? Specifically, should every single management plan for an aquatic invasive plant now be required, maybe even by law, to include a formal public health risk assessment, focused specifically on vector-borne diseases? It's a big question, but maybe one we need to ask if we want to get ahead of the curve before the next health crisis emerges from these complex environmental changes.
That's a really provocative point, but perhaps an increasingly necessary one for how we allocate resources and plan for the future. Definitely something to consider.